Welcome to the Dark Ozarks. We are discussing lore and practices of the Celtic world and how it lives on in the Ozarks. Whether you have Celtic ancestry or not, these oral traditions have impacted the world around you. We'll get back to that in a minute, but first we want to remind you that the Dark Ozarks podcast is now available on Branson Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, or about any other podcast platform. So what about these ancient beliefs that might surprise people living in the Ozarks?
I think that the answers are complex. A lot of these old ways probably sound familiar, from the role of the land, water, death, and even old conjuring ways that have found their way into everyday life. The bottom line is that this ancestral lore is everywhere.
We will return to the question of how the ancient Celts live on in plain sight in the Ozarks. But first, we want to invite you to like, follow, and subscribe to Dark Ozarks on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, as well as your favorite podcast platform. We also invite you to become a Dark Ozarks subscriber on Facebook. On the Dark Ozarks Facebook page, click subscribe, have your login information ready, and join Dark Ozarks behind the scenes for only $4.99 per month.
Your $4.99 per month subscription allows you to come with us on paranormal investigations, deep dive research, and topics that are too controversial for public view. The next 100 subscribers will be entered in a drawing for a free Dark Ozarks t-shirt and an exclusive signed first-run copy of the book Dark Ozarks: The Spooklight. Subscribe today to be entered in that drawing.
And now you can get Dark Ozarks t-shirts for sale at darkozarks.com and paranormalsciencelab.com.
We do encourage you to check out Always Buying Books in Joplin, Missouri, in person and online, on Facebook and at the website alwaysbuyingbooks.com for all of your reading needs, including a large section on the paranormal, history, and more. Not to mention, the building is haunted. Tell Bob and Elise that we sent you.
We also want to thank Beard Engine Brewing Company in Alba, Missouri. Beard Engine Brewery is the only English-style brewery in Missouri and has been twice named Missouri's best brewery by the Missouri Brewers Association. Great beer and great food in a historical building with a noir past. And yes, their building is also haunted. Tell Nate and Tiff that we sent you.
Really, really great stuff. And as it is March, we are marching forward, see what I did there, to St. Patrick's Day. And as part of that, something a little bit different in terms of Celtic mythology, water lore, and all of these things coming together here in the Ozark Mountains.
Yes. It's a pretty fascinating concept. I mean, water tends to have a lot of symbolic meaning anyway, just, as a metaphor for life and death, etc. But uniquely in the Celtic world, and particularly in Ireland, it became even more so. And the idea of the right to rule as a king,
yes,
very, very much tied to water, particularly a bursting of water, whether it's a lake, a river, and sometimes even the sea. But a prerequisite was a death and a burial.
Yes, and of course, the one of the very first foundational myths of Celtic mythology tells of water springing forth from the earth, coming down, and interestingly enough, this is associated with Danu, the ancient primordial goddess of the Celtic pantheon. This is also where we get one of my favorite names the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, and she is a water deity. This is for whom the river Danube is named, and then the idea that the waters of Danu watered an acorn, which grew into a great oak, symbolizing the center of the Celtic cosmology and the priesthood of the Druids through the knowing of the oak, and and that was also associated with the, interestingly enough, the in essence birth of the first primordial god, the Dagda.
Yes. And then it became more of a practical mythology that in order to be a legitimate ruler, it really, over a course of eons, particularly in Ireland, leader would have to bury someone close to them, usually a son, and that water would burst forth either into a river, lake, etc. And it was very much linked together. And then the new ruler had to clear fields for the people.
And it is, of course, it's a beautiful representation of a primarily agrarian clan family structure. But I think that this innate cosmology, especially when it's combined with what we recognize as Celtic artwork, particularly the open-ended curve, we really see the illustration of a cosmology or a viewpoint that has no beginning and no end, and one that really ties to death and then life, and then death and then life, over and over through the eons. And I think that there's great things that we can really pull from that, as well as the fact that just the mythos itself is incredibly beautiful.
It is, and it really paints bodies of water as a boundary space, ironically often depicted as the site of battles itself. And so that what is very interesting to me too alludes to a transformation, not only passing from life to death through this boundary space to the other world, but that there's a continuation almost in the sense of a shape-shifting.
And I think that's really interesting. Of course, many of our commonly known tales of shape-shifting have been unconsciously or subconsciously influenced by Celtic mythology. Of all the Western European pantheons, the Celtic mythology is currently, I would say, one of the least well-known.
Yes.
And yet we are more aware of it than we know. We just are aware of it without realizing that it has Celtic bases. And so many of the motifs of the shifter, of the shapeshifter, of a shaman, a witch, a wizard, our ancestral concept of wizards definitely come and are heavily influenced by a variety of druidic practices, as well as, of course, the Germanic and Norse picture of Odin. But it is a substrate, our idea of the shape-shifting fairies, the prankster fairies, these types of things. All of these tie back to a commonality of a Celtic belief system.
And it survived in more intact over time in the British Isles, in the Celtic areas of Wales, Ireland, Scotland, Mainz, Cornwall. And ironically, of course, these are the groups that often immigrated and ended up pushing forward on the frontier, so that these are the same groups that in large portion settled the Ozarks. And so a lot of these beliefs and customs end up turning up in the Ozarks fairly recently, even.
They do. And that unique cultural anachronistic quality that portions of rural Appalachia and large portions of rural Ozarks have enjoyed and or suffered through, depending upon one's perspective, did a lot to help preserve elements. I do think it's fascinating in terms of analyses, because the effects of Roman Catholicism, the effects of the Anglican Church, effects of Presbyterianism, effects of frontier religion have all had their part to play in some ways erasing the elements of what we would recognize as a mythology, but they did not, in so many cases, erase the folk practices that were associated.
Right. And so in sense, it's a very hands-on subject, because it's the practices more so than the actual mythology behind it that we're confronted with. And we're going to talk about these things and much more in the long format video that will be uploaded tomorrow evening. So check back for that, and we appreciate you following along. Don't forget to check out upcoming events and merchandise at darkozarts.com and paranormalsciencelab.com. Thank you again to Always Buying Books and Beard Engine Brewing Company for helping to bring the Dark Ozarks to everyone.
On the next episode, we are going to be discussing mirror magic. Catch the Dark Ozarks podcast on Branson Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, or about any other podcast platform. Thank you